slightly backwards and down. We're going to do this back thing here. Our cerebellum. We're going to learn some cerebellar stuff now.
Can I ask you a question about
Yes.
the mesocephalum part?
Yes.
When you talked about the quadrant gemini?
Yes.
The quadrant is 4,
Yes.
but we only get 2?
There's one for each side. To right and left, so it's 2, and right and left.
Oh, 2 and 2.
2 ears, 2 eyes, 3, 4. Yep. But I need to. So, cerebellum. Is this number 4?
4.
All right. So the way this sounds stupid, but people remember this way. The bellum is the bell of the ball. All right. So tell me, if you go to a ball, what's important to be able to do if you're in a ball? Dance requires what?
Feet coordination.
Feet coordination, balance. So there you go. Your cerebellum is primarily responsible for things like balance, coordination in a gross way, meaning large coordination. Your motor skills in the sense of not the task itself, but can you do the task? So if you tell your arm to do something, does it do it? That kind of thing. And then they have what they call error checking. For motor skills. So if I told my leg to kick, did my leg actually kick? All those kinds of tasks are cerebellum. Everything with balance, coordination, equilibrium, all those kinds of skills. So when you're learning to walk, what part of your brain do you think you might use?
Cerebellum.
So that's why it takes you so long. As you're learning to become a biped, your cerebellum has to keep your balance, figure out how to keep you coordinated, and how to make sure your legs are where they belong when your brain decides to tell you to walk. So cerebellum is basically all your biped stuff. Or this trivia. When you go drinking, anyone guess which part of the brain is highly sensitive to alcohol? Take a guess. So tell me what happens when you drink. These go off, so you're drunk, yes. Because you're going to sway and all that. You can't touch your nose because you don't have any brain ability to do that. You missed your nose and you don't know it. Not that I would know personally. But that's the idea of the sobriety test. Sobriety is based upon your cerebellum performing. That's how that works. When you come in sobriety, again, our cerebellum. If you think about our pons' job is to connect our cerebellum to what you're thinking. And that has to do with this part here. So if you don't have a pons, there'll be no way for your cerebellum to know what you want it to do. So that's partly the pons' ability is to coordinate the cerebellum with what you're thinking. If I want my foot to move, how does my cerebellum know my foot wanted to move? That's part of that pons system. But now we're going to move up one more step. We're going to do the big thing on the top. What the heck is this big thing?
Cerebrum.
Cerebrum, not to be confused with cerebellum, because they look alike. The last part of our brain we're going to talk about is the cerebrum. This is called the thinking brain. That's the part you think of when you think brain, is your cerebrum. It's the wrinkly part. And it's so stinking big and so stinking impressive, we're actually going to break it down further than what you see here. So I'm going to show you a picture showing a cerebrum broken down like this. And you'll notice some weird colors and whatnot. But if you remember your skull bones from last term, you will understand what we're talking. So I see something called temporal lobe. Can you guess where that might be? On the side. Here's an occipital lobe. Where might that be? Back. This looks like a parietal lobe, which would be, and then this one in front must be a, yeah. So you learn the bones to learn the lobes. They're named the same way. So we're going to break down our cerebrum into these lobes and figure out what each lobe is doing for us. So leave lots of space. So let's do cerebrum over here.
What is the difference,
Yeah.
in the book when I was reading, what is the difference between the cerebrum and when they refer
refer to it as the cerebral cortex?
Not at all, there's no difference.
Okay.
Formally, the cortex is the outside, the top part, the part you the wrinkly part, yeah, the gray matter.
Okay.
If they just say cerebrum, they mean that, they look like cortex. Because the middle part, the medulla part, is usually just the white matter connections are. But if you say cerebrum, you're implying cerebral cortex.
Okay.
You're just sort of,
I have the same question about the visual and auditory reflex that's
Yeah.
in the corpora. Is that the same to say the cortex, the visual and auditory cortex?
No.
Okay, so that is a different
That's
place in the brain.
If they say cerebrum, they mean cortex. Let's do our lobes. So we're going to take our cerebrum and we're going to break it down to lobes. So you have a preference which one you want to start with?
Frontal.
Okay, pick the hard one first. All right. We have frontal, parietal. I'll do occipital, and temporal. Same with the arms. And there's a whole lot of activity in all the lobes, so we're not going to go too neurotically into it. But let's see if we can figure out some generalities. So here's frontal lobe. Here and here. Looking at those pictures, those words, can you figure out what a frontal lobe does? What does it do?
Abstract thinking.
Good. So we think this is where your abstract thought is. Now, we call the whole cerebrum the thinking brain, but we think your thinking is there, but we don't actually know. Okay, so we say thinking. What else do you think a frontal lobe is for?
Language.
Language. Very good. And I'm going to be a little more specific. Spoken language, specifically the speaking of language, the words coming out of my mouth. Okay, what else is in my frontal lobe besides speaking?
Emotions.
It can be. Decisions can be in there.
Primary motor.
That's what I'm hoping someone would say. All right. Primary motor area. So remind me from last term, what does motor mean?
movement.
Movement. So primary motor means moving voluntarily. So everything about you moving voluntarily is in the frontal lobe. Planning to move, thinking to move, doing the moves. When you're taking your notes, you are using your frontal lobe to write the words out on the paper with your pen to slap me with. Primary motor area. All right, so we have thinking, we have, why would spoken language be in the frontal lobe? It's motor, good idea. It takes movement to speak. So another word you'll hear people use is motor speech. Doesn't mean you have a big mouth, just means that you're making words. So forming my tongue and mouth requires motion. So the spoken words tend to be in the frontal lobe. Just so you have a word to impress your parents with, speaking words and all that is sometimes called Broca's area, or your Broca's brain.
That's your dominant side.
It tends to be, yes. So if you have a Broca's problem, you have a problem with speaking.
And the Broca's in the frontal?
Yes, it is. So you hear people call about Broca's. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But my frontal lobe is for moving, talking, doing my thinking stuff. Okay, let's see if you can grab this word. Can someone tell me what frontal eye field means in English?
No.
Means moving my eyes. What lobe is that in? Why would frontal move my eyes? Motor. Right. So pretty much any motor you can think of is going to be frontal lobe. Moving my eyes, moving my fingers, moving my toes, moving my tongue, moving my face. So anything that deals with moving eyes, anything is going to be here. So good way to study for a test. Frontal is for moving and talking. That's a good answer to the test.
So I've heard the theory that if you like do a stationary bike while studying or whatever, that's supposed to help like your brain consume information. Have you ever heard that?
Sounds like an internet thing.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone come up with a paper that said that.
You're using blood circulation.
I haven't heard gonna help me study. And here in this picture, they're showing the motor speech area, aka Broca's area, aka making words, aka talking, whatever little thing you want to call. And again, it's in my frontal lobe because to make words requires my mouth has to move. So let's zip over to our parietal lobe, which is just behind it, which is right here. This kind of yellowy area. So looking at those words up there,
Sensory.
can you tell me sensory? Good word. So primarily, your parietal's primary somatosensory. Okay, so in English, can someone tell me what somatosensory means? Feeling my body. That's not feeling emotion, that's feeling touchy-feely, pokey-proddy kind of stuff. Right? So you're feeling your fingers, you're feeling your toes, you're feeling your nose, whatever. Right? And then if you look, what else are we doing there?
Understanding.
Understanding words. So understand language.
When you're doing the first degree, does that mean like your major?
Yeah, major,
Okay.
primary,
Or primary?
right? It's major. So let's look at this interesting brain thing. You talk with your frontal lobe, but you understand with your parietal lobe. They're not the same job. So it's comprehension, perception. You're feeling the words, quote. Right? So sometimes this is given the name Wernicke's, just to give it a name. So you hear people about your Wernicke's area, they're actually referring to this understanding the words. As separate from the Broca's, which is making the words come out. Okay? So parietal lobe is feeling and understanding words. Again, parietal. Now, let's do occipital. Looking in that, tell me what your occipital is for.
Hearing,
Processing. Visual.
Vision.
visual.
Everything visual is in your occipital lobe. You can see the board, say thank you, occipital. Seeing the images, interpreting the images, making the picture form. We'll learn more about that when we do senses. But everything with vision is the back. Your mom said her eyes in the back of her head. It is. Literally. So let's think about that. You've seen that in cartoons. If you hit someone in the back of the head, they what? See stars, see little birds, black out, because if I hit your brain in the occipital area, that's going to affect all your visual fields. So you will black out. You will see stars. That's what vision's for. Let's go to our temporal lobe. Temporal lobe.
It's mixed.
It's a mixture of what? We have hearing,
Memory.
hearing and memory,
And putting
And
everything
seeing.
together?
and some seeing. But that's mostly the memory. So you have hearing near your ears, and we'll talk about memory next week when we do interpretation and integration. But for today, you're going to learn that your memories tend to reside in your temporal lobe. That's different than the thinking part. This is what you remember about your life, not the thinking about a math problem. That's up there. This is remembering
So it's experiences.
experiences.
Is there a difference in that brain between short and long-term memory?
Yes. This part tends to be the long-term, what I actually remember. Short-term tends to float around between these two. You know, if someone can tell you a phone number, you'll remember it for 5 seconds. That's up in here. If you remember your phone number for your life, that actually moves to here. That would be recalled longer. But those are your basic lobes. So what I'm going to do is we're going to show you a picture, and I'll show you the animation here in a second.
So is that where our language memory is stored?
They think so. We don't know, right? We have to kill people to do this, but we tend to interpret that any of your long-term, you remember who you are, you remember your language, you remember this, that would be here. So I know this is a human class, I know, but as a biologist, I like looking at critters, so let's look at some critters. Just to draw some conclusions. So here's Mr. Shark, Mr. Frog, Mr. Crocodile, there's a bird, there you, okay. So let's look at Mr. Shark. And I want you to locate his cerebrum for me. Does he have one? That right there. That's sort of the cerebrum. Not too huge when you think of it. not compared to a frog. So, what do we think about sharks if they don't have much of a cerebrum? We don't think they think. Now, of course, that is biased, right? Maybe they do French chess. I don't know. But we like to think that we're smarter than a shark because we have more wiring in our thinking area than they do. So we think sharks are dumb and we are smart. That's a bias. We think that.
They can eat us.
Yeah, we kill it,
But
yeah.
we're afraid of.
And they don't have food or dentists, right? I mean, it's something like that. Okay, so I want you to find the cerebellum on the frog.
The little stubby.
Picky uppy thing. That. Okay, compare that to the bird.
Wow.
All right, so now I want you to explain to me why frogs have a small cerebellum and birds have a big one.
Because they fly birds fly.
Yeah. Try flying without balance someday. If you're a bird, it takes a whole lot of computing power to stay in the air, upright, in a wind, and perch on a power line all night without falling off. It takes a lot of power. So birds have a lot of computation time in their cerebellum. What do frogs do for balance?
They're low to the ground.
They're on the water, right? You don't need balance in the water, you just float. So it doesn't take a lot of computations for a frog to be upright. So hence, they don't need a lot of brain. Now, maybe frogs have great balance, maybe they can fly, I don't know. But we assume that since they have small cerebellums, or don't have as much reason to balance. Okay? So if you look at us versus the cat, what do you notice?
They're about the same.
Proportionally
We're the same. But if you think about it, we're bipeds or quadrupeds, right? So we do need a little more math to do our balance thing than they do, because we're bipeds. So if you look at the cat and us, we like to think that we have greater what? Which one was the biggest than us? So we think we think better than a cat. Maybe we don't, I don't know. So now the thing is, you can't compare individual people's brains and make any real conclusion, right? Whether you got a big brain or small brain doesn't matter. But in terms of species, you sort of see a trend where everyone's got about the same medulla, right? Medullas don't change. Why might that be?
For breathing and
Yeah.
for radiation.
Life support's the same everywhere, right? You gotta have a heart, you gotta breathe, it's about the same. So they call that your reptilian brain because even reptiles got one. What changes is the higher brain stuff, the cerebrum, all that stuff begins to look more and more different as you go up the chain. So we like to believe, as humans, that we're the smartest animal because look how big our brain is. We mean our cerebrum. Because actually, the bird has a bigger cerebellum proportionally than we do. But we don't like to believe that. So you can make some general trends. So if you know the basic brain parts, you can make some trends. What you're going to do in your healthcare, yes?
Doesn't the difference come more down to the degree of inward folding?
Yeah, basically.
So surface area versus actual size? So there's a lot of animals that have bigger brains than we do, even proportional to themselves.
Right, and then the connections and synapses within them. That's how you're going to make some generalities. What you're going to focus on in your healthcare career is this weird picture. Yeah. Okay, if you're paranoid, schizophrenic, don't look at this. There are not really people in your brain. There's my TV. There's not. Okay, what this is trying to show is a general idea. This represents primary motor area. Remind me what lobe that would be. Frontal lobe, motor. Primary somatosensory would be parietal. So this is chopping through someone's frontal lobe on the red, someone's parietal lobe on the blue. Okay? So frontal, parietal. And what they're showing is different regions of those lobes are devoted to different body parts. Okay? So if we go over here, and I look at that, I say, okay, which body part has the most brain devoted to moving it? In other words, what body part takes the most brain to move? You would say what? Face. Gee whiz. Is that about half?
Yeah.
Why would a face take so much of your frontal lobe? It takes a lot to move a face, right? Emotions, talking, what? It takes a lot of computing power to move a face. What other part of your body takes a lot of brain wiring to move? Hands. Imagine playing a piano with, right? Okay. Instruments, writing, touching. Okay, so let's look at your hip. How much brain space does a hip take up to move? Because what can you do with a hip?
A lot.
Okay, there you're done, right? White guy, right? So you get the idea that, like in a computer chip, you're devoting circuits to different body parts. The more I have to do with it, the more circuitry I devote. So a face and a hand take up a lot of the brain's computation power to move in the frontal lobe. Go over this way. This is the feel. Which part of your body takes a lot of brain space to feel?
The arm and the hand.
Hands again. What else?
Face.
Yeah, look at your lips. I thought this is fascinating. Your lips take up as much as your hand. Why would you need wiring for lips?
Again, expression.
Expression, feeling food, textures. So it takes a lot of computation power. You feel like kissing, right? If you look at your guts, all your abdomen's here. Doesn't take a lot to feel an abdomen, right? It's on or it's off. So the same logic kicks in. Your brain devotes some wiring for different body parts. And so now if you think about what would happen if you damaged your brain, now you can sort of figure out why grandma and grandpa have different symptoms. So for example, when my dad had a stroke, he could not move his left leg. Let's figure out where he damaged his brain, so he couldn't move his leg. Where would that be on this? Moving.
Well, it would be on the right side if it's
So
on
his
the
frontal
left.
lobe does movement. His leg is about here.
Yeah,
And then if he can't move his left leg, it was his
right.
You just diagnosed my dad, right? He had damage to his right frontal lobe in this spot. That blew out his circuitry for his leg. He fell down, right? Let's say grandma can't feel her face. What lobe would that be?
Frontal lobe.
Can't feel face.
He does.
Right, feeling, right? And then you could argue, well, here, and then the opposite side. So what you're just doing is diagnosing brain damage and stroke. It's the opposite side normally, and then you have to figure out what lobe it is based upon the symptoms, and then you can go further.
But they have a foot on the bridle and a foot on
Yes.
the motor.
Because
and
I'm moving one of
leg.
them.
movement, one's feeling.
So they're mixed. So
Right.
I mean,
So hence my dad, he
You can have
damaged,
numbness, but still move it.
he can't move it, but he can feel it if you touch it. So he
Oh,
lost
he
the
can
motor
feel it.
skill, but he didn't lose
Feel
the
it.
sensory skill. So grandma could have a droopy face, but she could maybe be able to feel it if you touch it. Or I can't feel, it's numb, but I can still wiggle, right? Or it's both, right? So your interpretation of strokes and things are based upon this understanding of the brain wiring. Yes?
So would the face on the frontal and bridal be in relation to each other close in the brain?
They might be.
So you could
I'm
just
not real up
take out
on,
the whole part.
yeah, they tend to be in the same general area, but I don't think they necessarily have to be adjacent. But the idea being, think of the common stroke characteristic. You know, some strokes because they have a problem moving their what? What's the most common place you see a stroke? Grandma's face. Well, think of it. I mean, it's half the stinking spot, so it makes sense. Just randomly, you're going to affect the face. But this is how you diagnose brain damage. You're thinking of what lobe, what side, and what part. So we're going to do that now. So get out your packet of pain. We're going to diagnose some brain problem. You don't have your packet of pain, we will send you down. Find this one on page 7, cerebrovascular accident. I'm going to walk you through the class some of these answers, so we can just kind of get through them a little quickly. So we have Mr. Dexter, 52, smokes like a chimney, good for him. One day wakes up weakness and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's go right to the question. Number 1. What is a cerebrovascular accident? What does that mean in English?
So frontal
Brain
lobe.
blood problem, right? So, a stroke or a cerebrovascular accident is you no longer get what to your brain?
Oxygen.
Yeah, blood via then through oxygen. So essentially, you stop getting blood flow to your brain. The brain runs out of whatever it needs. So how could you do that? How could you stop blood flow to your brain? Occlusion, blockage,
Swelling.
clots, swelling. Right, so something happened and you're no longer getting blood flow to and from a brain. By the way, a heart attack's the same thing, just on your heart. You just get blood flow. So something happened to Mr. Dexter, and he can no longer get the blood to his brain, so his brain begins to die off. So what you're going to do, future healthcare professionals, do number 2. You're going to look at this case study and tell me some factors that made him risk for a stroke. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to figure out why he was at risk for that. See if you can figure out what made him more likely to. There's more than one, by the way. Okay, husband and father. There you go, right there.
Where am I gonna get this from?
My website.
Okay, and then when you include me, when you sign me up, I'll be able to access.
You can get the website anytime. It's open source. You don't have to be in the class.
Okay.
You go to that, whatever it is.
Look in your PCC email.
Yeah, he emailed us.
Yeah.
Well, because I'm running across it.
He wouldn't have. Because
Oh, right.
Roger.
So if you go
So I'm locally me.
go there,
Okay.
or just type in my name on the search engine, and I should. I'm on YouTube supposedly. I can find me somehow.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, many times.
Those royalty checks I'm still waiting for. Yeah. I'm gonna keep waiting a long time for that. Okay, so let's go through some Mr. Dexter stuff and tell me what said you're at risk. So tell me.
Obese.
Smoking's always a good plan. There's a way. So smoker, what else?
High lipid profile.
Obesity,
My lipid,
lipid
content.
profile, cholesterol. What other things were risk factors? Was it? Ethnicity, being black, yeah, it's a risk.
Husband.
Being a male, having kids, yeah, I got three of them. Age, all those things. So if you think about factors that affect blood flow anywhere, affect that. So smoking is number one. Cholesterol, because they block, blood flow. Being black actually is a risk factor, black more than whites. Being over 40, right? You can just keep going down the list. Being obese, you can just keep adding stuff. But generally, those are the risk factors, Smoking will kill you dead. Cholesterol will plug this thing
We
up.
don't know genetics besides being black. I mean, genetically, why?
Yeah, I mean, if his father had it, then he'd be more at risk as well.
Why would men be more observant?
Just is. Yeah. They used to believe women never had heart attacks. They found that was just convenient thinking. Women have heart attacks, but for some reason, men are more likely to suffer bad heart attacks. And I've said lots of things on it where people say, well, it's this, that, and the other. Who knows? It's just being a male is a risk factor. But smoking is number one. So let's go through then, number 3 then. What are these Brodmann areas and what do they relate? So I haven't given you that word, it's not that important in my world. But all these different things have been listed. Those are called Brodmann areas. What you do in a brain area is a Brodmann function. So for example, Broca's is a Brodmann word. That's where you make speech. Wernicke's is where you understand speech.
So those specialized areas?
Specialized areas. So believe it or not, you can get a book of the Brodmann areas. They're all numbered and sequenced. Number 51 is here. Number 52 is here. So what this means in English is these are specialized areas in your brain. There's a Brodmann area. So how does that have to do with a stroke? What does a stroke have to do with it?
If your Broca was affected, it was going to affect your speech.
That's right. So if I damage the Brodmann area, I'm going to damage that specialized function.
So you practice specialized function within that little.
Yes. So this is how you're going to diagnose the person, is just remember what thing does what where, and then that's how you diagnose a stroke. So if I damage the part of my brain for vision, I'm not going to see, right? So you're using that Brodmann idea to interpret the damage, because if the brain was random, you could never figure it out. Right? So we're going to skip question 4 for a second. Go to question 5. Speaking of Brodmann areas, this brings up Broca's and Wernicke's. Tell me the relationship. What's the job of a Broca area? Form words, speak words, make my mouth do its thing. And Wernicke is
Understand language.
understanding, interpreting, comprehending, whatever word you want to use there. So one is to make them, and one is to understand them. So we're going to go back and look at Mr. Dexter. And you're gonna start reading right about here. You're gonna tell me which one he is damaged. Vote for Broca. Broca. I think you're right. Let's figure it out. He can't make the word, right? He only makes blah blah blah. However, he can respond to commands, is fine. So in other words, I understand you, I just can't get the words to come out of my mouth, right? If we're the other way around, I can make words, but I wouldn't understand what you're telling me. So yes.
Is aphasia also like
Yep.
an effect in the pelvic area?
Yep, and they would call that a Broca's aphasia.
Okay.
Is you can't make the words come out right. So he has problems getting the mouth to work in English, but he can understand what you're saying. So he comprehends, but doesn't make words. So we're going to say his Broca's was damaged. Make sense? I mean the deduction? All right. So we're going to say Mr. Dexter damaged his making word Broca motor speech part. So now here comes the question number 6. Would his symptoms of a stroke be ipsilateral? Oh, those are words from last term. Ipsilateral and contralateral. What did ipsilateral mean? Same side. Contralateral means?
Opposite.
Tell me which one a stroke would be.
Opposite.
Contralateral. How did you know that?
It's the crossover.
Decussation of the pyramids, right? The brain normally crosses the body for most intents purposes. So if he has damage, it should be in the opposite side of his body from his brain because of the decussation of the pyramids. All right, so now we're going to go back. We're going to skip number 7 for a second. We're down to 8. We're going to try figuring out where Mr. Dexter damaged his brain. Let's go line by line as a class. Okay. Up here. All right. He wakes up with weakness on his right side. So that means the damage is probably on what side of his
Left
brain?
side.
Contralateral. Okay. Confused. Well, I'm bad every day. I don't know if that helps. Seeing double.
Occipital.
I'm going to argue that's probably occipital. We don't know that for sure. We're going to say probably occipital. Speech is slurred. We figured that was where? Broca's, which now tells us the frontal lobe problem. Right, okay. He can't walk. He stumbles. Where would that be?
Cerebellum.
Yeah, it could be cerebellum. That could be a balance problem. You could argue, well, maybe it's his motor. Right? I mean, it's a little unclear, but we're getting there. Okay, wife does the good thing. Okay. All right, so here they get in his room. He has right hemiparesis, right weakness loss. All right, he's got problems with his reflexes. Diminished imprint, two-point discrimination, and his deep tendon on the right are positive Babinski. Okay, so go back to last term. Those are spinal reflexes, and they're excessive or they're wrong. What does that tell you if the reflexes are excessive? Is that a spinal problem or a brain problem?
Brain.
It's a brain problem. Because what would happen if I damage your spine? What would your reflexes do? They wouldn't work, right? Normally, spinal reflexes don't. So you have to remember that the brain oversees the reflexes, but doesn't actually directly control them. So you have excessive reflexes, that means it's this brain problem trying to overcompensate for the reflex, which we'll talk more about next week when we do integration. But all this is saying is he has some brain problems. He can't talk real well. He's got some weird blood pressure. So let's bring it down. We figured out his stroke was probably where? His left side. And which lobe do we think? Frontal. Okay. And maybe, possibly, maybe this.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to do to study this whole week. Is think about, if I have these symptoms, where would my problem be? If I have problems here, what would my symptoms be? That's the goal you're going to have in nursing, is to figure this thing out. So we think it's this problem, his frontal, his occipital, maybe cerebellum, on his left side.
And parietal too, if he can't understand, right?
Well, he can't understand. It implies he understands.
Oh, he can't
He
understand.
can't understand. It's
Is
not
the-
inherent.
Is the Broca's is frontal?
Frontal, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You okay on that skill? Okay, so let's go back and then fill in one more question, which is number 4 over here. We've got collateral blood flow. What the heck that has to do with anything? I'm going to show you a picture. Get another one. And you're going to go, gee whiz, I remember that. Okay, this is your brain looking up at your brain. And we talked about blood flow to brain, right? Okay, here's some blood flow to your brain. And there's a magic little thing right here in the center called the circle of Bruce Willis. All right? That's an important thing, because I want you to look at that closely. I want you to look at these arteries, which are in red. And what do you notice they do? Why do you think they're called the circle of Willis? They connect all the way around. They make a complete roundabout. Why would you want your arteries to make circles to your brain? I mean, why put a circular artery in your brain?
Continuous flow,
And why would you want continuous flow?
because you need oxygen and nutrients.
And what would happen if I stop my blood flow to my brain? You start to die. We call that dead, right? So if you think about it, you don't want single arteries going to your brain, because if the artery becomes plugged, you die, right? So just like a roundabout, if I make the blood go in a circle, if this exit's plugged, I can always go back around and take this exit over here, right? To get to the same general location. There won't be that traffic jam if the single one's plugged. It's called anastomosis. Your heart does the same thing. You send the blood in a complete circle, so hopefully somewhere you're going to get blood through. This is also called collateral flow. You can send blood multiple routes to get to the same parts. We're going to learn these parts in general, so you can do some collateral. These are called your cerebral arteries that we're going to learn now. So you're supposed to know cerebral arteries and where they generally go. Let's learn those.
Your frontal. And your
Do I make the picture a little different here? So, we have an anterior cerebral, which is this one right here. So from your guesswork, where do you think that's going to go? What lobe of my brain? Okay, that's going to go to the frontal. And goes to a little bit of the parietal. And we'll talk more about that in lab. But it kind of goes basically right up the center. Right here. Then you have this big hulking one called the middle cerebral artery, the MCA. Anyone guess where that's going? Parietal and temporal. Very good. Right through here. Then you have a posterior cerebral, which bends this way. So the PCA.
occipital.
And that's going to be your occipital. There's a little bit of temporal too. But these are basically the giant tubes that are going to feed those basic parts of the brain. But they're all connected in a loop. So they're all basically fed by the circle of Willis. And that's going to be your collateral flow, is that blood can go from one of those to the other one and bypass one if need be. Is that a good thing or a bad thing that you have collateral flow? Yeah, it could be both, but mostly it's a good thing. That enables you to keep blood going to your brain, even if something plugs. So let's do that. Let's put a blockage from that green dot right there. If you get a cheeseburger stuck on the green dot, right here, that's going to take out flow to this middle cerebral artery. But what happens if you're this anterior? Can you still get blood there?
Yeah.
Yes, I can go on this side, right? That's good. Can I still get to this one?
Yep.
Very good. So even though there's a plug on the road, there's another way around that. That's the collateral flow. That guarantees you get more blood flow than if one was just a plug and took everybody out. So you want collateral flow. That's helping your brain avoid strokes. Well, at least we do for that. Makes sense? So your circle of Willis is a very good plan for trying to get blood always to all of your brain all the time. If it's a single tube and you plug it, you're dead. So in lab, you have to learn the circle of Willis in a little more detail. You okay that collateral flow? That's good. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about trans-ischemic attack?
Yes, what that is basically like a mini stroke. So what happened was you got a clot or something somewhere. You reduced blood flow, the cells started an oxygen, that's an ischemic attack. And then the clot either broke loose or the blood flow increased or somehow it was temporary. So what happened was you had like a mini stroke, you started losing function, which didn't actually cause cell death or enough cell death to have a permanent one.
Because it's short.
It's short.
Okay, and in a series of them, don't they happen in series?
They can.
So it doesn't necessarily have to do with any particular artery or, I mean, it's
Not necessarily.
pretty widespread.
Usually it's the smaller ones because you get a big clot. So what will happen generally is someone gets a clot in their leg, deep vein thrombosis, breaks off, floats around and gets jammed in one of those. And then what happens is it plugs it, you get a TIA. The pressure builds behind it, eventually pops it loose, it travels down to the next part, and then does it again. That's why they go in series. You keep breaking the clot, it keeps shifting its way through and finally it
Got it.
passes out. But it doesn't have to be in series.
Okay.
What happened was you started having a stroke, you got a stroke, but it didn't last long enough to cause permanent brain damage. It just
So-
caused symptoms and mild damage.
So when they say people are more, if you have one, you're more susceptible to having them in the future, but is that because it's the same clot floating around in there?
They're probably playing it safe. I mean, it could just be you're likely to clot.
Ah,
Like my dad's on every blood thinner known to man. They think he's likely to clot again, so just keep helping his blood doesn't clot.
okay.
But, you know,
So, like in a question, you would refer to the arteries, the cerebral arteries, like if there's swelling, and you would do that if there's something wrong with like movement or speech.
Right.
Okay. Anything else that we could refer to that medically? We would use that for.
Usually they would use this after they diagnose a stroke and say you had a stroke because your MCA was plugged.
Okay.
That's what they did with my dad. So they said, well, your MCA probably had a clot. So they're meaning you plugged this pipe here, and thus this part of your brain got plastered. Right? But usually this is after, post facto, once you know the diagnosis.
What does the M stand for again?
Middle.
So if you have a stroke and you have like complete paralysis on the
You
whole
probably
side of
nailed
your body,
everything
you
on one
probably
side.
nailed one of the bigger ones.
Yes.
So everything after
Yes.
that, then it would be,
Right. So if you plug, right at the circle of Willis, that big tube there, you may keep this, but you're not going to get anything there. So the size and complexity of the stroke is based partly on the size and complexity of the blood flow that you nail. Right. Little strokes are fine. So you get the idea. So when your goal is to go home and think about, well, grandma has this wrong with her, that's here. You can figure out where the blood problem was, which artery it was. Right. Let's go. So we're going to do that together, in fact. Let me show you this page here. Turn to the page in your packet. We're going to do this first case study here. I'm going to show you an animation. We're going to go to this case. So this is exactly like your quiz and test will be. So we're going to let you do it by yourself here. Here's our patient. Here's the symptoms. And then you're going to go down and answer these questions. We'll give you 3 minutes to do that. And then we'll talk about it. Dive in, happy folks. Except for question 4, you can skip question 4. So, you don't know that yet. Yeah. All right, let's start walking through it. To do number one, you have to figure out where her stroke is. So let's just go through line by line and figure that out. So paralysis of her right face and arm. That means you can't move them, therefore she damaged her what?
Left frontal.
Left what? Frontal lobe. Because decussation means it's the opposite side, contralateral. Can't move is frontal lobe, because frontal lobe is always motor. Okay, loss of sensation to touching her skin on right face and arm would be
Left parietal.
left parietal. Opposite side, but touchy, feely, wiggle, giggle, that's going to be parietal lobe, right? So now we've narrowed it down to those two. So now, which one of these best fits frontal parietal? That sounds like a winner. She damaged her anterior cerebral artery, or that's what the plug was, that damaged this part of the brain. That's basically what feeds those two. The logic there? All right. So now, why was she paralyzed in the right face and arm? Seems a silly question. Because she damaged her what?
Frontal lobe.
Her left frontal lobe, the opposite side frontal lobe. It's kind of a silly question. Now number three though, her language disorder. This we're going to use that Broca's and Wernicke's phrasing. So tell me, which one does she have a problem with? Making words or understanding words? Broca's. Because you look, inability to answer questions, meaning, but she understands them, and she can write them fine. So in other words, she just can't talk. That's a Broca's problem. Motor speech is a Broca's problem. So she has a Broca's aphasia.
So I don't understand how, you say she can write them, which
Yes.
is a motor skill.
Right.
But
But you don't need to make words in your mouth to write.
But how can she do the writing though, if she's got damage to the frontal lobe?
Because it only damaged this part.
Oh, but not the hand.
Not the hand necessarily, or maybe not her writing hand. Right, so in the little magical schizophrenic face, it damaged the face and arm, but maybe it didn't damage her hand. Right, so it just damaged that part, but she can still write. Make sense? So now, we figured out she has damage to those places, that artery, that spot. Now we're going to do number 4. This is a weird little question, but it's just a word you're going to hear off and on. In biology land, me, not psychologists, not doctors, dominance means where your Broca's is located. Where you make words is your dominant side. And for everybody on the planet, it's always the left. So 99% of everybody has Broca's in the left frontal lobe. It's like a 3%. So almost everybody in the planet is left dominant. That has nothing to do with your handedness. It has nothing to do with anything. It has to do with where you make your words.
Is there a way to make it to the right side when they do when they dissect half of the brain?
It won't. It doesn't necessarily move sides. It can move locations within the brain, but it doesn't necessarily change sides. And there are some people that are neither side dominant. There are some people who are right side dominant, but most people are left side dominant.
And this is just for language and
Just
not
for language.
motor. Okay.
So, if you damage your left frontal lobe and you stop talking, I've damaged your dominant side. If I damage your left frontal lobe and you can keep talking, that must be your non-dominant side. So, for this woman, we damaged her left frontal, she stopped talking, therefore we damaged her dominant hemisphere, her dominant side. Again, it has nothing to do with handedness or anything else. It's just, I hit her Broca's, I hit your dominant. And there's no way to know unless I kill you which one it is. So we would say we damaged her dominant hemisphere because she can no longer make the words. Make sense?
What did
Okay.
you call the full disorder, Broca's?
Aphasia is the fancy word for it. Yeah, out of phase. But that's just another, you say Broca's damaged. You okay on this stroke type of stuff? Okay, so there's one more thing we have to cover before lab actually, and that is the cranial nerves. We're there for help, yes, I know. Because in lab thou shalt memorize and lecture, thou shalt know the cranial nerves, thou shalt, their name, their number, their type, their sensory location. Just leave it be long. and write nasty speeches on it. Alright. Let's go through the cranial nerve that thou shalt start to memorize, and you will know it.
Do you have any rhymes for us?
I have some dirty rhymes, yes.
Oh my god.